everyone. Welcome to the Leesburg Public Library Show. My name is Tom Wilcox. I am an adult services librarian at the library, and I am here with my guest, Dr. Lois Wilmoth-Bennett, who's written this wonderful book called Essays on Living with Alzheimer's Disease, the First 12 Months, and it's an extremely good book. Dr. Bennett will appear at our local author showcase on Saturday, October 13th in room A and B at 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. And the whole theme of this will be actually inspirational books, and I found this book to be very inspirational. And also, I just wanted to let you know, Dr. Bennett's associate, Miss Joan West, she'll be presenting another workshop on Saturday, December 1st. And the workshop will be based on her books, An Agent Speaks, a primer for unpublished writers and Publisher Speaks, helping writers succeed. And that should be quite interesting. We have a lot of budding people, writers in this county, as you can tell by so many people going to the local author showcase. So we had a great turnout last year, and we'll do it again. So without further ado, Dr. Bennett, do you wish to be called Doctor or Lois?
Lois will be just fine.
Okay, Lois is good. All right, Lois, can you give us a little of your professional background, please?
Well, my graduate work was done at Kent State University in Ohio. And I started out as a school psychologist and then was licensed as a clinical psychologist. Then I became associated with a group who sent psychologists into nursing homes to work with elderly people. And many of those had Alzheimer's disease. So I ended up consulting with doctors and supervising interns, working individually with residents. So it really was quite an interesting thing. I ran the gamut from being elementary, high school students to working with the elderly. But all of that was in Ohio. Okay,
well, I'm sure it's pretty universal, although I think sometimes some Floridians are a special case. But, okay, Dr. Bennett, can you tell us why it's important? I mean, that was the biggest single message in the book, to when you're having Alzheimer's disease, or to be a little shorthand, use AD, to not be a victim.
Well, people really should not be defined by their disease. People still have feelings, they have skills, they have a lot to contribute to society. So once they get the diagnosis, they should do whatever they can do to take care of the problem medically, but then go on and live their life as they would otherwise. If they become a victim or feel like they're a victim, then they become actually part of the disease itself. So I say never become a victim.
Right, I understand, because you're not the person, you're the disease.
Right.
Okay, well, can you give us a little background on basically how AD is, you know, what degrees there are of it? Because I saw some things that said MCI. Could you give us a little explanation of something like that?
Okay, MCI is an interesting term because some doctors and some people who don't like the stigma attached to Alzheimer's disease or AD will say, oh, I don't have AD, I have dementia, or I have MCI. Well, MCI is mild cognitive impairment, which is a precursor to Alzheimer's disease. And one thing that I guess we usually say is that everyone who has MCI or is, quote, diagnosed with MCI does not necessarily get Alzheimer's disease. But if you have Alzheimer's disease, then you have at some point or another had MCI.
Okay, I understand. It's just like you can be HIV positive, but still not actually die like originally they thought, that as soon as you got it, it was like death.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, I think I get that.
But there are a lot of several diseases that fall under that big umbrella of dementia, and Alzheimer's is the largest part of the dementia group. So there's a lot of others that will come under that. Some of your Parkinson's, some of your the NPH, normal pressure, hydrocephaly, some things like that all have very similar symptoms. So when you go to the doctor, the doctor has to do a differential diagnosis to determine which it is, because some of those can be cured, others cannot be.
Okay, well, actually, that is a good intro to the next question, because, how accurate are the diagnosis tools today?
Well, years ago they used to say the only way to get a diagnosis of Alzheimer's was through autopsy. And personally, I didn't want to wait that long, but wouldn't do me much good.
Yeah.
But mostly what I've read has said that doctors feel they can get a good diagnosis 90 to 95% of the time. Not everybody agrees with that, but they do it through use of radiological techniques like PET scans and MRIs and different scanning techniques that they use, along with the doctor's clinical evaluation and a really good history of the family of the patient and of the patient himself.
Yeah, that last is an interesting point, because I developed a PowerPoint show mostly for genealogists, but it also can affect everyone. And basically, it's how to construct a family medical history. And that, of course, would it would work for anything, AD, heart failure, all sorts of things. So it's quite important to be able to do that, and certainly very helpful to your physician.
That's right.
Okay, but well, here's a loaded question. How many people is it known who are actually diagnosed with some form of AD?
Well, I don't know whether anybody actually knows, but they projected numbers. And those numbers have been 5.3 million people in the United States alone. That's not worldwide, that's just in the United States. And that was in 2010. I think now it's probably up to about 5.4 million. In 2010, it was like, it could be described as one person every 70 seconds was diagnosed with the disease. Now I think it's up to about one person every 67 seconds, so it is growing. It's a lot of people.
Oh yeah, especially with how many baby boomers? Something like 47 billion people.
Oh yes.
Yeah, but now I was thinking about this by mostly in your home environment, that is it possible for any sort of AD symptoms to be sort of mistaken for something totally different?
Certainly it is possible. As we age, and I found this out more, the older I get, I notice that you slow down a little bit. Certain things happen. Maybe you have a tendency to forget things a little bit more. You might get a little more confused about something, lose your car keys or something. But the key is that if you forget things and then you have some tool for remembering it shortly, generally that's a fact of aging as opposed to necessarily being Alzheimer's disease. But a lot of people get frightened because they say, oh, I'm forgetting all this stuff, I'm getting confused, and they right away get scared. Then they're afraid to go to the doctor because what if he says I actually do have it? And so it is very easy to mistake it for something else. That's why the doctor's evaluation is so important.
Oh yeah, because like with anything, you can do more earlier than later on. But You know what? I was also very curious. Is there sort of a gender factor here? Because I know some things where it seems like they afflict mostly men, other things they afflict mostly women. Has anyone ever done a study on that?
Well, they have done some studies on it, and there are more women who have Alzheimer's than there are men that have it. But the truth of the matter is that women live longer than men, and Alzheimer's is an age-related disease, because the older you get, the more chance you have of developing Alzheimer's. So simply because women live longer, you're going to find more women who are diagnosed with it. There have been studies done, as I said, but I don't know of any study that's actually proven that women are any more susceptible to it than men are. I think it's really related to the population, where that there are more women than men.
Oh yeah, I would believe that. But you know, I was going to ask that. Okay, someone has been diagnosed. I mean, is there a way to find out from a physician how to manage AD? I mean, what do they tell you? What do they tell your family?
Well, that really depends on what physician you go to, because usually it's a good idea to start with the family physician, but so many of them have not been very well trained in dealing with dementia or Alzheimer's disease. A lot of them are really reluctant to talk very much about it because they it has a stigma attached to it. And so a lot of them simply don't say too much about it.
Oh, yeah.
And I had a very special relationship with my doctor because of my background, because I had worked with Alzheimer's so much. So he was willing to talk to me more than what he would with other patients. But at the same time, when he talked with me in the office about it, I found that he kind of stumbled over his words a bit, because he's reluctant to say very much about it, because he knows that there's not a real positive outcome down the road.
Oh, yeah.
So generally, the physician is going to talk to you about options for the future, whether you want to start taking medications, whether you want to wait a while to start taking medications, at what point will you need to have your family maybe either live with you or you live with them. And so they're looking really at living conditions, at just taking care of you medically down the road.
Oh, yeah. And actually, one thing people should know is that the state of Florida and their healthcare administration website, you can actually get forms to have like a medical proxy and you know, medical surrogates and all sorts of documents to help you prepare for things. But of course, they can only cover so far. You also probably need an attorney at some point too for certain things. Yeah. But now, you know, do you feel that families tend to react very emotionally to a diagnosis such as this?
Yes, I think they do, because once again, families don't know how to react to it. Families are used to being with you every day, and maybe they don't notice the changes as they come apart. And they'll say, there's nothing wrong with you. You just kind of forgot that you had a senior moment, or something of that sort. And they don't tend to believe the diagnosis a lot of times. When it gets so bad they have to believe it, then they don't quite know how to deal with it. And they get frustrated a lot of times, because you get things like people with the diagnosis will repeat things a lot. They'll say something to you and they'll forget they said it 2 seconds ago, and they'll repeat it again. Or they'll ask you the same question over and over and over again. If you're a caregiver, that gets really bad after a while. I went through that a lot with my mother, because she would repeatedly ask, how much money do I have, or where am I living, or something like that. And it wasn't just once or twice, it was just repeatedly, time after time after time. So families tend to get frustrated. They tend to maybe overprotect sometimes. It depends on the family a lot, but there's a lot of different reactions, and we haven't developed a real good way of helping families to really deal with the topic.
Yeah, I think that's very important. But, well, since you spoke of your mother, how has her experience actually helped you?
I think the primary thing that I learned from her experience is not to put too much off onto my children, because it is really frustrating as it goes down to the children. And you have to learn how to plan ahead, because she didn't have everything planned ahead. And so that left a lot on my shoulders. Even though I have 5 brothers, the daughter in the family, being the only daughter, you're the one who has to handle all of this.
I know, I found that to be most interesting, that fact.
That works that way a lot. But planning ahead, looking at, okay, number one, the one thing that I did was I wanted to go on medication right away. So I made that decision for myself. Secondly, I don't want to live with my children. And I don't want my children to have to take care of me whenever I get to the point where that I can't take care of myself. I don't want them to have to do that. So I'm making provisions so that that doesn't have to happen. And then also when you get, I guess maybe the most important one is the end of life decisions, where that you have to make those things that we never want to talk about. You have to really plan ahead for what you want. And I have to admit, I procrastinate on that too. I'm the great procrastinator, but I have started looking at it and making some actual decisions so that my daughter does not have to make all those decisions for me.
All right, that's good. But, I was just thinking that what would you think, could you say the greatest barrier it is for an AD patient in a visit to their physician?
You mean in terms of when you go to the doctor's office? I think probably communication. That seems to be the big thing with so much of this, because the physician doesn't always know how much to tell the patient. And as I said before, some physicians are a little reluctant to give too much information. And they end up talking maybe to the caregiver as opposed to talking to the patient themselves. And so really you have to prepare when you go into the doctor's office and have a list of questions if you have questions you want answered yourself. But it's important to have that caregiver or somebody with you so there's another set of ears to hear what he says.
Oh, yes.
And if he says something that you don't quite understand, don't be afraid to ask him again. You're paying him for his services.
Oh, yeah.
And he needs to tell you, or she needs to tell you, what you need to hear. So it's a two-way street, the communication.
Okay, but okay, can you tell us a little bit about some of the current pharmaceuticals that are available to actually help with AD? I know your book, you mentioned Aricept.
Okay, the medications. There's not really a very wide choice. Aricept is probably one of the major ones, and Namenda is another one. Generally, Aricept is started out with, and then as the patient moves into maybe toward the moderate stage of the disease, they start with Namenda. And those two together seem to work pretty well. There's also something called Axona, A-X-O-N-A. It's a medical food, and many physicians will prescribe that to help the Aricept and the Namenda work better in terms of helping the memory and just clarifying the person's ability to understand things. That particular thing didn't work real well for me because it kind of made me sick. And I took it for maybe close to a year, and then my neurologist said it works really well for some people and it doesn't work quite as well for others. So I personally quit taking it. But I know a lot of people who do take it, and it works very well for them. There's also a patch that some people wear. I believe it's called Exelon.
Okay.
And they wear this patch, and that would be in place of using the Aricept. And there are some medications once the patient gets into maybe behavioral problems that are used. They're actually used in other situations, but they are used for behavioral situations with Alzheimer's. But most of the studies that they're doing recently, it seems like they get really excited about some new drug coming out, and then when it gets to the very last phase of the trial, it doesn't work. So those are the basic ones that I know about, and that seems to be what most of the people I know are taking.
Okay, and well, you know, I was also going to ask you to comment about how medical offices deliver news of something like that, because if they're doing it for AD, they're probably doing it for everything. And I mean, I was shocked.
Well, if you saw my video that's on YouTube, it probably comes across better than it does in the book. I've had a lot of comments on that, but I was, as you mentioned, driving up a mountainside when I got a telephone call telling me that I had Alzheimer's disease. But I think that maybe I'm a special case because of what I mentioned before, that I had a very special relationship with my doctor, that he talked with me more than he would with most of his patients because I have such a strong background in it. And some of this carried over to the office personnel. So the person who called me didn't deliver the message quite the way he intended for her to.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
Because I mentioned it to him. But he said, well, that wasn't quite what I wanted her to say. But she was relatively new, and you know, she did what she thought she could do, and she kind of knew me because I come into the office. But I would say this does not happen as a usual rule, because I think that most doctors, and my doctor too, in most cases would be very much more gentle in what they said, and it wouldn't come as such a shock. It wasn't really a shock to me because I expected it, but at the same time, when you hear somebody actually put those words into words, then it is a shock.
It does change. I remember my first trip back to New York after 9/11, and I mean, I knew the towers were not going to be there, and yet it still was a palpable shock not to see them. It is different. I totally understand.
That was kind of like that.
Yeah, but I was going to ask you though, can you give some ideas on how much it actually costs to manage AD?
Well, once again, I don't think anybody really knows, but they project figures. And in 2010, they were projecting that a cumulative cost going from 2010 up to the mid-century, like to 2050, it would be approximately $20 trillion accumulation of what the cost would be to take care of all the people. Now, they were looking at the increased numbers of people who are being diagnosed. And they're also looking at the fact that by 2050, so many of these people will be in the severe stage. You mentioned baby boomers. Well, there's so many of them. And with Alzheimer's, you can live anywhere from 6 or 8 up to 20 years. So theoretically, there could be a lot of people in that severe range. And of course, in the severe range or severe stage, it takes so much more money to take care of the person because it's total care.
Oh, yeah.
I think the other estimate in terms of what, like Medicare and Medicaid and insurance companies would have to put out, they went from about $7.5 million in 2010 to saying that it would be about $1 trillion in 2050. So the increase is significant.
Oh, yeah. But, you know, we're getting ready to wrap up, but I did want to ask you, did you find writing this book to be a really good, positive thing for you?
It was absolutely a positive thing for me. It was like journaling because I was able to put my thoughts down and look back and kind of see where I was at certain points, and almost like reading about somebody else when I would go back and read it. But I refused to give in to Alzheimer's. As I said, I refused to be a victim. And so I did what I could do medically. I started medication very early, and then I kept on going. And I'm kind of a pusher. I keep working, and I failed retirement several times, as my children have told me. So I find it to be very therapeutic and interesting, and if it can help other people to give them some idea of what I went through in terms of diagnosis, the tests that I had, and something of what they have to look forward to, it helps them to know that they're not alone, because it is a very lonely disease. Nobody else really knows what you're going through. And most of the books are written by somebody who knows somebody who has Alzheimer's, or a professional who's writing about it.
Right.
And I wrote it from a threefold perspective, from somebody who has been a professional and worked with them, somebody who's been a caregiver because I took care of my mother for a decade, and then someone who is diagnosed with the disease. I've been diagnosed with it for 4 years now. And so I think I can give a better insight into the whole range of feelings about the disease. And I hope that people, get the message from that.
Okay, that's great. Well, in closing, I just want to let everyone know, please come to the library for the Author Showcase, October 13th. You can actually get to meet Lois and talk more about her book, and I think you'll actually have a very good time. And thank you for watching the Leesburg Public Library Show.
Thank you, Tom.